You know, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country.
Stop laughing! And when I do, start fucking.
Also, y'all did some nasty ass jokes on my ass, too.
Funny jokes and unfunny jokes come out of the same birth.
You fucking guys are unbelievable.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to a bonus episode of Why You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you Opie versus Jim Norton, a follow-up, a part two of sorts to our Opie versus Anthony episode. People seem to enjoy that. So I promised you that if I got enough feedback, we'd do Opie versus Jim. And I'm delivering on that promise. It seems like people were interested in it. And then as I prepared clips for today, I realized there might be more here than there was with Opie versus Anthony.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, we could definitely do a part two if we wanted to, Opie versus Anthony, particularly with, you know, the aftermath, the things that have gone on kind of since where we left off in the episode. But Opie versus Jim, there's a lot there because I think it deteriorated more unexpectedly and more rapidly. And it developed into what I thought was some very interesting radio. And I should note before we get into it, because someone mentioned after the Opie and Anthony episode, they were like, hey, you didn't get into Anthony. You know, they said you should get into the claims of like pedophilia and all the talk of racism and this and that. And like, it just didn't make sense to do because it had nothing to do with Opie, in my opinion, anyways.
Yeah.
Like we'll do eventually, I think we'll do an Anthony getting fired from Sirius episode. I know already that I want to do an Anthony versus DeRosa episode and an episode about the Opie and Anthony subreddit. So we'll get to all of those at some point. But it was just like, I think because we were more on Anthony's side, they're like, oh, you think Anthony's a hero? It's like, no, I realize he's a pretty flawed guy. As we were just, me and Craig were just talking about Anthony's Twitter. So we're very aware he's a flawed individual. But I just didn't think it had anything to do with the Opie episode in particular.
Yeah, the only thing we really have concrete proof at this point in time is the racism.
He's made that pretty clear. He's going out of his way to prove that one, it feels like.
Every time we're like, no, he doesn't mean that. He goes, no, I do mean.
He's kidding. No, I'm not.
Yeah, so I don't know how much fun that episode
So we'll get into
be.
that another time. But today is about Opie versus Jim, which, like we have mentioned in past episodes, Jim was brought in as the buffer between Opie and Anthony. Opie and Anthony were, good friends at WAAF here in Boston. And then there was kind of a riff over time, as often happens when you work closely with someone for a long period of time. And particularly when you're equal, when it's a partnership, jealousies pop up and things like that, resentments. And Jim was brought in to kind of cut the tension in all of that. But Jim has sort of I don't know if alpha is the right word because he has such little self-confidence. And I think his lack of self-confidence has actually hurt his career. Like he's a much better comedian than he gives himself credit for, much better radio personality. And I think we'll play a couple clips that kind of show like his self-worth has been to his detriment. But as far as like attitude, like when he knows he's right or when he feels he's right, he can be like an alpha. And Opie, I don't think ever wanted that around him.
Yeah. And we do get to a point too where if we go back to the Opie versus Anthony episode that we did, you'll hear Opie kind of take the Anthony tactics in this battle. I thought like he felt like he was more,
Yeah, and here's the thing: is Anthony's very, very passive and non-confrontational. I don't think Jimmy, thrives in confrontation and seeks it out the way Opie does, but he's very good at dealing with it. When you force him to deal with confrontation, he's excellent at it, I think.
Definitely.
But we'll get into it. We will go way back to the year, I believe, was 2005. And much like the Great Grape incident that we talked about with Opie versus Anthony, this is an early fight that people point to as, in the grand scheme of things, having nothing to do with anything really, what they're actually arguing about. But there's a lot that's very telling of things to come. So this is the start of the Sean Rouse argument. Sean Rouse, by the way, a comedian who is no longer with us. I think he passed away a few years ago. Okay. But he was a guy that opened for Jim Norton. Jimmy brought him into the studio one day, and Opie was, I guess, like kind of a dick to him on air. And essentially, the segment that Sean Rouse was in for, Chris Jericho was also in. And Opie would, come back from commercial breaks and be like, hey, we're hanging out here with Chris Jericho, and not even acknowledge that Sean Rouse was in the room.
Yeah, I think they also left him in the hallway for an insane amount of time. That was also a big part
it's weird behavior, and maybe we'll explain it more as they go along, depending upon what they leave out here as far as details. But let's just get into it. This is Opie versus Jim, coming back from a break where Jimmy confronted Opie in the hallway.
Hi, we're back with the Opie and Anthony program. I'm trying to eat. Huh? I'm trying to eat.
By the way,
Jimmy,
that is Anthony.
Fucking set me off.
For any of the diehard O&A fans, that is Anthony seeing the spaghetti hit the wall. His dad is yelling at mom. Anthony's just, he knows what's about to come. I'm trying to eat.
I'm trying to eat. Jimmy just fucking set me off and bullshit.
Yeah, well, you annoyed me too, so I guess we're human.
No, it's bullshit, bro.
Say what you want to say, but I'm not some idiot. You're annoyed at me, I'm annoyed at you. It's life.
Basically, he thinks we blew off Sean Rouse last week. Because
no, you.
I didn't blow off Sean Rouse! What happened? Huh? What happened? Yoshi's here and the dude from Slap Happy, and Jimmy's like a little up to, are we gonna get him on the air? I'm like, yeah, eventually we get him on the air. I'm not like, whoa, let's stop the show and get these guys in immediately. And he's like, well, you have a tendency to make people wait outside, and then they eventually come in, and then blah blah blah. Tough shit.
Is that the way I did it? Did I just whine at you like that?
Yeah, you did whine at me.
Yeah, and then you're
like, Sean Rouse came all the way up here to do the show, and you don't even thank him at the end of the show.
Yeah, you don't.
Like, I had a personal problem with Sean Rouse?
I didn't say you had a personal problem. I just thought it was something that
Sean Rouse opened up for you in Atlantic City. You asked, you want Sean on the show Monday? I'm like, yeah. I didn't know he was driving
you
to
said, hell yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, like, it's interesting because we've heard a lot of guys. And again, just to go back to this, like, my defense of Anthony and Jim, I do like them more. Like, they just make me laugh more than Opie. But like, my defense of them is really rooted in, like, I think Opie is wrong a lot of the time. Not so much that his points are wrong. Like he might have points at the end of the day. I think the way Opie treats people is wrong. And I think he's very delusional, and his self-awareness is just not there. It's not present. Which is why I think I defend Norton and Anthony more in these arguments, because the way Opie handles them. And even right here out of the gate, where he's like, hey, I thought you were a little rude to Sean Rouse. Opie immediately just starts with like, Jim's pissing me off. It's like, well, I don't know. What did he really say that's that bad? He's not, attacking your character. He's just saying this one incident was bad. So that's my overall problem with Opie.
This is when I wish they had like the Howard Stern hallway cameras. Just I would love to have seen it.
Yeah, right. Well, that's something like, it's funny the parallels with Howard, just because that's something they always wanted to get done and never could. And meanwhile, Sirius just dumps so much money into Stern. Whereas, like, if they did that for more shows, maybe it would have been a more successful company. But anyways, what's club number 2?
Opie is the boss.
Yeah, so this is a theme we talked about a lot, where like it's a strange line because Opie wanted to be the boss and doesn't want to be the boss. I feel like when it's convenient for him.
So then you're like, well, you didn't have to go to the Joey Paisano phone call.
Well, first of all,
that's a judgment call.
I don't talk like that.
That's
And
a
second of
judgment
all,
call. I went to the Joey Paisano call, and it was good radio. It was about gambling and addiction. You thought it stunk.
No, I didn't say it stunk. If I thought it stunk, I would tell you I thought it stunk. I didn't say it stunk.
What'd you say? What'd you say?
I could have waited till the next day because it wasn't something because he was only here for one day. I didn't say it stunk. If I thought it stunk, I'd tell you that.
Then you sit here and try to make this.
See, that's not a
make
valid
this
argument.
happen.
If I disagree with something, then don't ask people to voice their opinion.
Dude, I have to make judgment calls.
So that's a lot where Opie will be like, well, you sit here and do this. You do this job. And it's like, that is something Opie was very good at, was, steering the ship, as they always say. But then there's an element of like, well, you're not, this is not nuclear physics.
Right.
Don't say like it would be impossible for Jim Norton to sit there and figure out what segment to go to next. Now, again, if you listen to all their respective shows, I would say Opie was better at that than Anthony or Jimmy. So it's right for him to say like, hey, that's kind of that I handle that part of the show. So, don't question me unless you want to start doing it. But he's just completely missing, like the argument with Anthony. He's escalating it and bring it to like, oh, well, why don't you do my job? It's like, no, Jim's just saying you were rude to this guy. He's not saying he'd be better at it than you,
Yeah, I think you'd be kind of mad, Opie, if your friend was here and I ignored him.
Yeah, it's rude, and it's so I don't think I included any of these clips because it's just too long and convoluted to get into. But essentially, what keeps coming up in this particular argument is at some point, like Opie left Patrice out in the hallway to wait for a long time. Bill Burr, same thing. And what that means, by the way, like if you're not an Opie and Anthony fan, basically that means like, they showed up at 6:45 and didn't get on the air till 7:30 or something like that. They had to sit in the hallway for 45 minutes. Which for these guys is annoying because they don't wake up comedians don't wake up till fucking noon, so they came out of their way to come into the studio and had to wait around for an hour or something. So enough comedians have complained about this where I think this is Norton kind of saying like, hey, this is something you do often. I'd like you to stop doing it if I'm going to keep bringing comedians in here.
It's almost like Opie used it as like a status symbol, like a weird status, like, yeah, you have to wait to come on my show.
Very much, because there's a million stories throughout the years of guys saying that Opie would come up to them at events and say like, hey man, I think you're really funny. We got to get you on the show, blah, blah, blah. It's symptomatic of it's something that so many people say where it's, in a lot of these cases we say like, well, these people didn't all collude to have the same story.
Right.
Where all these people have a story of Opie coming up to them and saying, hey man, I think you're really funny. I dig what you're doing. We got to get you on the show, man. And then never returning their calls or texts, never inviting them on. Like when they say, hey, can I come on the show? He ignores them. And sometimes they'll end up talking shit like, oh, this guy's begging to come on the show. And that's just a weird kind of sociopathic way to behave.
Right. Right.
And so I think comedians just started getting frustrated with that. And I believe what you're seeing here is that spilling out of Norton, where these guys will come and talk shit to Jim and be like, why the fuck am I coming into the show to wait for an hour? Like why even invite me in if you don't want me on? That sort of thing.
Especially when Opie's not the funny guy,
Right. Well, I mean, but then that goes back to he is the host and he decides like, hey, I want to get to this phone call right now, or I want to get to this segment or whatever. So I do understand that a little bit, but it's weird. Put it this way. Sean Rouse is one thing. When you're doing it to Patrice and Bill Burr, that makes it feel like it's an ego kind of a thing.
Correct. Yes.
All right. What's next?
This is when Norton starts calling. He's going, you're the boss. You're the boss.
Yeah, well, this is something Opie definitely hated, but
yes,
you could tell by Norton's voice it's something they had to deal with a lot.
The old days, did you come in and it was dice and we got to you when we could?
Understandable.
That's how it happens.
When I was a regular on the show.
So next time,
but you'd never ignore me. You would always say Jim Norton's in studio.
So what do you think the problem was, Jim?
I think you should have at least thanked the guy
you
at the
think
end.
I had some kind of personal problem with you?
No, if I thought that, I would say it. I don't.
So
think
what do you
that.
think the problem was?
It was just a bad decision, and I said that to you off air. Like, I mean, because whatever. I didn't say you don't know how to run a radio show.
You don't.
I didn't say that.
You're funny and you're good.
Hold on one second, right there.
Where
Is Opie not listening?
Oh, correct.
Norton goes, I didn't say you don't know how to run a radio show. And Opie goes, you don't. He's responding to something he thinks Norton is thinking, but didn't actually say.
Which is the correct thing to say, listening to Norton react. It's like, well, you at least got that out of him, I guess.
Right.
Whatever. I didn't say you don't know how to run a radio show.
You don't.
I didn't say that.
You're funny and you're a good part of the show, but where I sit, you don't know what's going on.
I don't try to know what's going on. You're the boss. We all know you're the boss.
I have to make calls all the time.
I don't want to be the boss.
And sometimes, unfortunately, it's going to work out like the Sean Rouse situation. Oh, well.
Well, then don't ask people to give you input if you don't like the input.
I didn't. You said it.
Now, many times you say, hey, let me know what you think.
That's an argument that the three of them always go back to. You know what you did? You know what this person thinks?
You know, it's weird. It's petty and passive aggressive. But there is something to be said for, like, I've heard it on air, so I'm sure it would happen off air too, where Opie would be like, hey, like, you know, he would basically talk like Anthony and Jimmy were kind of equal partners in the radio show. Like, that was the vibe you got. So I assume that kind of, you know, tone was given off air as well. So Norton felt comfortable enough to be like, hey, I really didn't like this. And he's met with, well, fuck you. You don't know how to do this.
Shut up, third.
Yeah, right. And that's the weird thing where it's like, where it causes Norton to be like, well, you're the boss, is like, when it's convenient, I'm going to put you in your place. But at other times, I'd like to blame you for not stepping in more, you know?
I wonder if it was called the Anthony and Opie show, if Opie would have been different, just slightly.
Well, that's the weird thing about the Opie and Anthony show, and Norton too. Well, we'll get to a great Norton line about this later, but like, Anthony was a fucking tin knocker. It's not possible for it to be the Anthony and Opie show. Like, Opie did create it, you know. So that is one thing that Opie, you know, it might have negatively affected him because he always knew that on some level, I feel like, you know?
Right.
And I don't think he ever, like, literally did it on air, holding it over their heads. But I do believe he used that as fuel for his ego to be like, well, this is my creation, you know?
Yep, exactly.
And there is something Opie would always say that I don't believe is like, he goes, I had the vision for this radio show when I was 18 years old.
I guarantee you someone went, when Anthony would call in or do like his quick little spots and stuff, people were probably like behind the scenes, like, you should really have him in and try something.
Yeah, hey, he's really funny or whatever. But it's like the Opie and Anthony show changed so much over the years that, like, in 2012, when he was like, this was always my vision for the radio show, it's like, really? Because it wasn't the same show 3 years ago or 5 years ago or 8 years ago.
Right.
So which is it, you know?
Exactly. Next, we got just name calling.
And and this is where, you know, it just gets petty and it's not even about the argument anymore.
That.
I said thanks off air.
No, you didn't.
Off air, I said goodbye to the guy.
All right. Okay, off air, you say goodbye to him.
So I have a problem with Sean Rouse.
I never said you had a problem with Sean Rouse. Stop misquoting me. Stop misquoting me.
What's the big deal that he didn't get a proper goodbye on the air? You're insane.
I'm not insane. It was
what's
just
the big
rude.
deal?
You're the one you were raving about what a great comic you think he is, how you wanted him to come on.
What is rude about forgetting to say goodbye to a guy when there's
nothing.
Dude, when there's so much shit going on.
What was going on?
You hear Opie like kind of start to couch that because he realizes how ridiculous it is to say, what's rude about not saying goodbye to someone?
At least he was like,
well, that would literally be the example of rude.
Yeah, unintentionally rude if it was an accident.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, but still rude.
What is rude about forgetting to say goodbye to a guy when there's
nothing.
Dude, when there's so much shit going on.
What was going on?
Chris Jericho is here. I think we had something that we had to do at the show, you know. Make sure the show ends on time and in a nice fashion.
That's a lot of shit going on.
Dude, this is like, you know, if you're trying to make it seem like you're super busy every day. It's like, well, what did you do this morning? What did I do? I got out of bed, walked to the shower, turned the shower on, I bathed myself, I got out, I changed. It's like you're just listing things to make it sound like you were really busy.
We were talking to a guy who plays make-believe on TV in his underpants.
I'm walking in, I go right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, all the way into the studio.
I eat my omelet.
Going on? I don't know.
What's that?
No, sorry. I now hear where we are.
Oh.
Dickhead, because I don't know what was going on that day, fuckface.
Oh, don't get all angry and yell. You can't say you want me to voice my opinion and then get so pissed off when I voice my opinion.
You're insane.
I'm not insane.
You are insane.
No, I'm not.
You're insane at times.
No, I'm not.
So Sean Rouse didn't get the proper goodbye. Oh, well, it happens.
Okay.
It happens.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
You can sit here and try to figure it out.
See?
You can. Because you have all these opinions how it's supposed to work.
All these opinions?
You're
I fucking never say
you're
things
come
I don't
on,
like
man,
on the
let's
show.
get Yoshi
I
in.
never have problems with things that are going on.
Anthony is so quiet.
Yeah. He'll talk eventually, and it's probably 30 minutes into this argument.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I should say, like, the great people of YouTube made this very easy for me, where most of the clips we'll be playing today are essentially from one video.
Yeah,
there's a 7-hour compilation of Opie versus Jim on YouTube if you want to go check the full thing out. I do think this argument is very interesting. I feel like we're getting the highlights for our kind of, quick, whatever you want to call it, biography on the situation. But it is interesting to go back and listen to. And of course it ends with Jay Moore, who is the guest after this segment, just looking in the window and completely undressing, which broke the tension, I guess.
Next we got Opie escalation.
Yeah, this is, I mean, we've seen it in the other arguments we've dissected from Opie, where it goes from an argument about Sean Rouse and not saying goodbye to him to like, whoa, where the fuck did this come from? Wow, how are we here now? And just so you guys know, I believe the name Hugh Pinero is thrown out here. This is when they were at just XM. It was not Sirius XM yet. It was when they were at XM. Hugh Pinero is one of the higher ups at XM. Just so you know what that name is that they're throwing out there.
Don't you can't have it both ways.
No, it's bullshit, Jimmy. I think it's a cop-out when you're like, you have all these opinions off air, but...
What, all these opinions? What do you mean all these opinions?
You got these...
I want to know what you mean, all these opinions.
I want to know what you got this microphone in front of you. If you thought you could help the Sean Rouse situation, then start fucking talking.
What do you mean, all these opinions?
Then fucking talk.
I want to know what you mean.
No, that's it.
I'd like to know what you mean. That's a fair question. All these opinions, what?
All the opinions.
I love the way the show is going.
Dude,
what are you
I don't feel like getting into all the other bullshit with thinking everyone down in Washington is trying to, sidetrack the show. The marketing is not there.
Are you telling me that's me? Oh my!
I turned the corner.
Wow.
I turned the corner. I think they're now doing a really good job in Washington. You still think? Gary Hahn purposely fucking?
Dude, did you just say that?
Let's not change subjects. Stick to the basic gist of what you guys
You're
were
saying that
discussing.
I'm the one who thinks that things aren't getting done?
Pinero hates the show, right?
That, by the way, is Anthony. It kind of actually in a very good way, like not taking Norton's side at all, really. But completely seeing what Opie is doing and being like, hey, let's have the Sean Rouse argument. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about with the suits down in Washington.
He's trying to sandbag him. That's all it is.
So just for the full context, Opie and Anthony, when they started on XM, this is right after Sex for Sam. They had a 2-year hiatus from radio. They were held out because of their contract. CBS basically kept them off the air for 2 years. And when they got hired by XM, they were on premium channels exclusively. This is like 2004 when XM is a very new thing. And the theory by a lot of fans and Opie and Anthony and Jim at the time was that XM was kind of like embarrassed of the show in some way, which is why they hid them on premium channels. And once the show got popular, like people were paying for the premium, they wanted to be taken off and, be advertised more and things like that. Now, if you listen to Opie and Anthony, you know that Opie is the one that was constantly paranoid about that stuff and constantly battling management.
Anthony would sign contracts in like 4 seconds.
Yeah, I think the contract thing was always ridiculous, but even just like on a random Tuesday, you know, he would go off about the phones not working properly or, you know, some meeting they had to have, bitching about it and all kinds of shit Opie would bitch about. So it's interesting to hear him here throw Jimmy under the bus with something involving management.
What you guys
You're saying that I'm the one who thinks that things aren't getting done?
Hugh Pinero hates the show, right?
I'm not convinced that Hugh
I know
hates
for
the
a
show.
fact that he likes the show, okay?
I like the show. Are you really on the air trying to throw me under the bus with Hugh Pinero?
Well, now if you want to fuck around, Jimmy, let's fuck.
I'll fuck around.
Let's fuck around.
Go ahead.
That later, by the way, I don't think I ever noticed this. That later became a Chip Chipperson quote. You want to fuck around?
Yeah.
I didn't realize Norton held on to that for 15 years.
Well, you could hear the disgust in him.
No, he couldn't believe it because he's like, oh my God, now we're having an argument where like I'm being thrown under the bus with management because I said you should have said goodbye to Sean Rouse. Rest in peace, by the way. This guy's no longer with us. I'm sure Opie never said goodbye to him either on his way out.
Never. Bet he never visited him.
What do we have left from this 2004 argument before we get into the real demise?
Disgusted Jimmy.
Yeah, so you hear more of Jimmy is clearly like, good God, how did we get here, Opie? Like, what the fuck? I voiced something that bothered me, and now we're like, and Norton was pretty much always under the belief that he was going to be fired. He thought like management always hated him and wanted to remove him. So you know that paranoia is seeping out here when Opie's like, oh well, I don't know. You complain about Hugh Pinero.
I get a negative vibe. I get the calls, you know, and the frustration and stuff. And sometimes, this is all I'm saying, sometimes I wish you would also just point out a lot of the positive things that are happening. You do focus on the negative a lot.
That is so sociopathic. I almost don't know how to respond to it. Of course I'm negative and I point out the negatives, but to think, when I've agreed that this is more fun than commercial radio ever was. And you know I love doing the show, and you know I love. I love being here.
Behind the scenes, dude. There's always this negative vibe of what, you know, this, that, and this is coming. This is coming from me, who's a complete asshole a lot of times, and a negative person.
Then you should have told me that instead of saying, "Hey, man, I really like the way in the conference calls you speak your mind and you try to get shit done about the channel name change, and all that stuff." You coming from two different points of view.
We haven't had a conference call in 4 months, dude. We haven't had a conference call in 4 or 5.
That's just literally, now we're not even talking about anything anymore. You're just trying to win the argument. Where it's like now Opie's playing a character of this guy who wants to get the negativity out of his life when he's the most negative of the three of them, probably.
By far.
Yeah, at least when it comes to like radio shit. You know what I mean? Like they all have their hangups and everything. But like when it comes to, you know, the show being promoted properly and all that stuff, Opie was always far and away the most negative. So to now bring it to something just that he knew Jimmy would be sensitive about or get a reaction out of him is just like nonsense. Like now we're not even having the argument anymore, but that's what it would devolve into.
Like how he's like, I don't even know what to say to you.
Jim has some beautiful, like I've said before, Norton, not even necessarily one of my favorite comics, but one of my favorite guys, like might be one of my favorite radio personalities. Like I was a Jim Norton fan before I was even an Opie and Anthony fan, I think.
Right.
Like I saw Monster Rain before I really started listening to Opie and Anthony. So I was always a fan of his, and he has some great disgusted comebacks where he just pauses and you hear him like, that is so sociopathic. He's flabbergasted.
He truly was. I think the last part is just Anthony's prediction.
Yes, this is a very prescient point. I mean, like Nostradamus himself. Anthony chimes in here and kind of paints a picture of what it might be like should Opie and Jim ever be stuck working together.
You guys obviously need to, sit down and chat off air about things. I know both of you very well. I know both of your personalities very, very well. And I just see a clash going on there. That's for sure. I know Jimmy, like Opie says, Jimmy brings up a lot of the negative stuff and a lot of, he's always talking to the people in D.C. about the problems that we're having. That is, first of all, that's just inherent in Jimmy's personality, is to point that stuff out. And the way he does it, is it abrasive? Sure. Is it in your face? Yeah. That's Jimmy. That's the way he does stuff. I sit there and I have seen huge improvements over the course of the past couple of months. Things have definitely gotten better. There's still a huge problem. I refuse to pay that Club Soda Kenny bill. I refuse to pay bills that they keep sending me in the email. I'm not paying those things. Are they advertising more? Sure. See if that lasts. Your personality is what your personality is. I've been with you for 10 years doing this show. I know what it's like. And you've come leaps and bounds, over the past couple of years. But to see you and Jimmy in the same room for a set amount of time, which is the past, few months that we've been on the air, I just see, I see problems. It's the way both of you are.
I mean, home run, Anthony.
Home run, Comia.
Because, boy, did we get there. a short 10 years later. So, to be entirely fair, I included that to kind of paint the picture of what we're about to hear. But it should also be noted that through most of the XM days, Opie and Jimmy were genuine friends. The way Opie and Anthony were, years before. Like, Opie and Jimmy definitely were friends, and that relationship started to deteriorate the way it often does with Opie. But Anthony there, you hear him predicting, like, a working relationship where it's just the two of them would not work. Like, in an odd way, Jimmy was brought in to be the buffer, but Anthony was also the buffer between those two. In a strange way. So, I guess where I started there was to say that, like, that was in 2005-ish, but it's not like Opie and Jim hated each other for the next 10 years.
That didn't happen very often while Anthony was around.
While Anthony was around, I don't remember it ever happening again. Really,
I could not tell
on
you
the air anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah, I couldn't think of another example. Whereas, like I said, there was some audio that I couldn't find of Anthony and Opie dusting up. I can't think of any with Opie and Jim. By the way, side note, real quick here for you patrons. Remember we talked about Anthony mentioning how Opie always had this in his mind that Dice and Howard made fun of Opie's dad.
Mm.
You remember we were talking about that?
Yes, I do.
Like Opie's dad dying. A few people reached out to me and pointed this out, and I think this is correct. Howard Stern made fun of Mancow's dad dying. And I guess in that discussion, it was mentioned that Opie's dad recently died or something, and then they blew right past it. So technically, Howard did mention Opie's father one time on air. But it wasn't what Opie created it to be, apparently.
Yeah, apparently the nasty things that were said were at Mancow's expense.
Directed to Mancow, yes. So Opie's been fighting Mancow's battles for 15 years, apparently. Anyways, now we fast forward to Anthony getting fired for racially charged tweets outside of, he was in Times Square. He got into an altercation with a black alleged prostitute. Anthony was taking pictures in Times Square. Very weird. I don't really understand it because he's like, oh, I just like photography. Like I was taking pictures of, Times Square and the scenery and everything. And this woman happened to take a picture of her. My guess as a fan of Kumia's for many years he was taking a picture of a large black prostitute that he was going to make jokes about to people.
Yeah, it was
his private life. That would be my guess. I don't know if that's the case.
He would do the scenery pictures a lot on his Twitter back then. I do remember them.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I do think it was purposely taken.
Very likely, but regardless, Anthony got fired for. This woman saw him and approached him and just started like beating the shit out of him, basically.
Well, because she saw
started hitting him.
Yeah, she saw the flash and turned around, and he had the camera, so she went after him.
Yeah, so she went after him. Anthony did not respond physically, but did respond on Twitter, that got him fired on 4th of July weekend. Now, my theory is that if Anthony did that rant on air, he never would have been fired.
Especially, too, because like Norton would have lightened the mood during it, too.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And, who knows what comics might have been in that day, if Bobby Kelly or Voss was in there to bust his balls also. So, yeah, I think you're right. It would have been a lighter atmosphere if he did it on air. Norton would have taken the side of the woman, probably.
Right.
So that makes it just a different thing, and that's something I think Anthony has never understood about Twitter. Or he completely understands it and doesn't care. But if you look at his Twitter now, he has certainly doubled down on what got him fired.
At least doubled down.
Yeah. But what happened there in 2014 is you were left with the remains of a once great radio show. And now it was called Opie. Well, here's how you knew it was dead in the water the second this show started, because it had like 3 different names. They never decided on what it would be called. It was Opie with Jim Norton, Opie and Jimmy, Opie and Jim Norton. And there was never really a set name, which is not doesn't technically matter, but it's just not great if no one knows what to call your radio show.
Yeah.
And so Opie and Jim did the show together, and they were kind of in turmoil, and they were both getting it. Opie was getting a much more brutal beating, but Norton was taking a lot of shit as well. And the internet was giving these guys a ton of shit because they were like, hey, your brother essentially got fired for something like we talked about, I think, in the Opie versus Anthony episode. They were doing a bit called the apology clock in 2014, where they wanted to see if they could go a full week without a public apology being written about in the news, where there was some news story about, someone apologizing for something they said or tweeted or whatever. I don't believe they made it one full day. So it kind of became a funny bit at that time because it was right when people started getting fired for this shit. Then Anthony gets fired, and his co-host of 20 years doesn't make a stink about it. So the fans were like, hey, what the fuck?
This was hands down, by the way, the best time in the O&A subreddit.
Best and you know what? Yes, that was the beginning of the end, though.
Yeah.
It was they were unified with Anthony for that, and then it became very toxic.
They were unified with Anthony, and then they turned. It was complete chaos because they eventually ended up turning on Anthony.
Turned on Anthony. It was a very
Opie had
a gross scene.
Yeah, Opie had a 6-week run where everyone was behind him.
Right.
It was so funny.
But yeah, so Opie and Jim were kind of just left there hostily. And here's the blame I would put. If you want some blame on Norton, my blame would be, again, to go back to the kind of confidence and self-worth issue. Norton looks at this as a steady paycheck, a good job, and so he's not going to leave it. He wants that, God forbid something hits the fan with stand-up, like it did, by the way, in 2020, so you can't say it's never going to happen. If stand-up goes away, he has that consistent paycheck to fall back on. And I think he likes that security. Now, my argument for him to have a little more self-worth is I think the Anthony and Jimmy podcast would have done crazy numbers. I think the Opie and Anthony podcast also would have done crazy numbers, particularly at that time where you'd still be technically very, very early into podcasting. I just don't think Norton knows what he would have been worth to get into podcasting at that time. So I think that was a misjudgment on his part. But he wanted to stay with Sirius. Opie didn't give a fuck that Anthony was gone, so he wanted to stay as well. And they started out on their own show. But it was very weird, and they had this tension between them, and Opie would have other comics in, like Vic Henley and Sherrod Small, who were friends with Norton for sure, but you kind of got the vibe that that's not who Norton would have picked to bring in necessarily.
Right.
I think Opie was bringing in guys that will laugh at Opie's jokes.
Yep.
More than make the audience laugh. So that kind of devolved into where we got the Esther Koo fight. So we heard the beginning of that in Opie versus Anthony, and that's where this picks up, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so we hear a little more at the start of that argument.
Well, it just got weird because I'm asking you something. You're like, we're not that close like that, which is fine. But
Well, you know we're not. I mean, we do a good show together and stuff, but we're not that close.
So now you're mad at me for something?
I'm not mad. I'm not mad. We're not close yet. What, this is a surprise to you? We're not close.
I mean, it's been, by the way, it's been done 10 million different ways in shows and movies and just conversations. No, I didn't do that.
Oh.
I mean, it's if you were writing a tell, it would be, no, I'm not mad. What do you mean?
High-pitched
voice like that.
High-pitched voice is number one tell in anything.
Mad? Why would I be mad?
We're not close yet. What, this is a surprise to you? We're not close. We do a good show together. It's okay. Don't say ugh.
I'm going to say ugh.
Don't say ugh. You know everything that's been going on. You don't.
No, but I don't know exactly what you're talking about. You're saying something that I don't know, and you're acting like I do know.
That's all right. And
you are acting like I do know.
No, I said I was surprised you
don't.
In a
conspiratorial tone.
I was surprised you don't know.
But I don't.
I believe you. For real. For real. I do believe you. Okay?
And it's not a matter of being close. Like, it's just this weird paranoia thing. It's like, what's going on? There's something going on.
There's no paranoia, but there's none. I believe you. If you tell me you don't know some of the real dirty shit he did over the years, that's fine.
I have no idea.
I believe you. I really do. But it does make me very upset.
He does not know. I mean, believe him.
So there's a mix of things here. Essentially, what Opie's alluding to there, I believe, Anthony. Well, I believe it because this is what Anthony believes. Opie's never said it publicly.
Right. Oh yeah, I think I know.
Anthony thinks like this is what happened.
Yeah.
Opie believes that Anthony had fake Reddit and Twitter accounts that would criticize Opie.
Yep.
I don't think that's true simply because Anthony was doing it on the air.
On the air and his own Twitter.
Yeah, so I don't think that's true. Now, what Opie might be thinking is while they were partners, this was happening. Which that would really annoy me. That would if someone I worked with had a fucking Reddit account where they're trashing me.
Right.
I have no idea if that's true. To be fair to Opie, the reason he thinks Norton knows about this is because of the famous text that we talked about. Yep. The little cunt won't even look at me. Opie's assumption, which years later it was confessed to be true, was that little cunt won't even look at me text was meant to be sent to one James Norton. And so Opie's looking at it like, oh, that's how these two guys talk about me when I'm not around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's the insecurity that Opie's feeling where he's like, oh, Anthony's totally comfortable texting Jimmy and saying the little cunt won't even look at me. And that's something that would make Jim laugh, apparently, which I don't know if Opie was aware of that prior to that moment.
You can't blame him
So that's where
either.
That's where I think Opie's paranoia is justified.
Yep.
But then to, play the other side, if I bring some topic to the table with Craig, and then Craig says, what are you talking about? And I say, I'm not going to tell you. We're not that close. It's like, oh, well, then we can't talk. We can't have a conversation then. I don't know. What do you want from me?
What a fucking shitty thing to say to someone you've known for 15 years.
I'm not going to tell you. We're not that close. Yeah, right. They've been doing radio together for 15 years, and they have been close personal friends.
They were the closer of the two in public, I want to even say.
And before this, prior to this moment, all of Norton's specials, there's a certain point where he says, hey, I'd like to thank Opie and Anthony. Without them, I wouldn't have a career, blah, blah, blah. Like, he did it in every special for a while.
Right.
And so it's like, to say you're not that close is pretty wild. And you can absolutely tell, like, Jim continues to kind of be funny here, but you can tell that hurt him. He's
oh yeah,
we're not close enough for you to tell me something that's seems pretty standard.
I think,
you know what I mean? Like, you're not telling me your wife's health diagnosis, you know?
He probably just doesn't want to come out and say, like, I just don't need you gossiping with Anthony.
Right. And the more Jim wears him down, he admits that a little bit. But yeah, you're right. That's a more direct way of what Opie's thinking.
As a continuation of Not That Close.
Oh, well, yeah, we have to hear how not close they are, of course.
But if somebody, that to me, that you don't need to be close to somebody. If somebody says, I'm not saying, like, why don't you think we're close? I don't give a shit about that. But if I say to you, what's going on? I don't think it requires us to be in love with each other for you to say off the air, like, this is what's been happening. I don't think that's an issue of closeness.
I've told you some of the stuff, and we've talked about some of the stuff, so... But I got more info and stuff, and I'm just blown away by it, to be honest with you. So, blown away.
You say odd shit to people, dude. You're a good guy, but you say odd shit to people.
Like what?
Like that. Like what? Like that.
Because we're not close.
That's one of my favorite quotes ever. Because what that is, by the way, like...
Can I get you a coffee, Opie? Jesus Christ.
Opie is saying... something like he has brought this up, the idea that Anthony has done something diabolical to try and ruin Opie's life, and Opie's the one that presented that. So Jim says, geez, what did he do? What did this guy that both you and I worked with for 15 years do to ruin your life? And this guy replies, I'm not going to tell you, we're not friends. So Jimmy's just looking at this man like, I don't even understand where we are in this conversation. It just says one of my fucking favorite quotes. And that's something Norton, I think, is great at, is just like analyzing people and responding in a disgusted fashion.
In a split second.
Yeah.
But I got more info and stuff, and I'm just blown away by it, to be honest with you. So, blown away.
You say odd shit to people, dude. You're a good guy, but you say odd shit to people.
Like what?
Like that. Like what? Like that.
Because we're not close, so why would I tell?
You say odd shit to people, dude. You're a good guy.
That's my favorite part, is you're a good guy. Like, I'm not trashing you as a man. You're just bizarre.
But having listened to Norton for so long, he probably said that and went, I shouldn't have went there. Like, in his head.
Yeah, but also it's like, that's something that I think was bottled up, because as a listener, you felt that way. Where, like, as a listener, I remember people feeling like Opie's arguments and then the grudges he would hold against people. It's like, it's a strange way to go about presenting that, you know?
Yeah.
So he is right. Like, yeah, he says odd shit to people.
We got responsibility.
Well, I think this is, again, very telling of their relationship and why it broke down the way it did.
Don't feel in the middle.
Fair enough.
But I'm sure you think that was somehow I'm against you. I'm sure. I'm positive. I
didn't say that.
You don't have to.
Oh, hold on, though. This is something where, like, I don't really blame Opie for kind of feeling that way.
I don't blame him at all.
Yeah, again, when you get that... Now, here's the thing, is I think Norton seems like a more reasonable guy or an easier guy to deal with in those moments. Like, if he said, hey, man, I know that Anthony was texting you that, so I know you guys probably talk shit. Like, we're going to be partners. I think if that's going to work, you got to be able to tell me what I'm doing wrong or what I'm doing to bother you. You know what I mean? Like, and that's so telling of Opie and Anthony and Jimmy's relationships, like if they just had those conversations, like, hey man, tell me what's bothering you, and I'm not gonna react like a child. If they all just did that with each other once in a while, they might still be together.
Right.
I'm sure you think that was somehow I'm against you. I'm sure. I'm positive. You know.
I didn't say that.
You don't have to.
I didn't say that.
I know. It's everybody else. I got it.
What? No, I took responsibilty for
No, I know. I sit here every day. You're right.
I did.
Cool.
But other people need to take responsibility too.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. So that is something Opie would say a lot, where he's like, oh, I take care of my shit. I've got my shit in order. Like, you know, it's this vague taking responsibility that takes no actual work. Whereas like, I know I can be an asshole. It's like, okay, well, just simply saying those words, I know I can be an asshole, doesn't mean you've actually examined what it is that makes people think you're an asshole. You know what I mean? You're not doing anything to correct the way you talk to people or deal with people. You're just saying this so now you can say whatever you want. You know, I've worked on myself, but I think you and Anthony are wrong and I'm not.
This next one is where this is when, I don't know about you, but I was like, they're not going to last for at all.
Okay.
This is the why are you here?
Oh yeah. This is where we really get into, like, everyone knew Jimmy was leaving. After the first half of this argument is like, you can tell, like, wow, I think Jimmy's actually hurt that this guy just keeps saying, like, we're not close. Like, it felt like Jimmy was hurt. And then the second half of this argument, it's like, oh, they're done.
I do think this was like, I don't know if Norton would have left before this, but I think like in the middle of it, he was like, fuck this.
You hear, and now I'll be honest, I didn't listen to Opie and Jim every day.
No.
I remember the reason I listened to this episode because people were tweeting at me. Like, did you hear the Opie versus Jim fight?
Yeah.
So I was like, I have to. But
this was definitely,
I didn't listen.
Yeah, this was definitely an on-demand go listen for me.
For sure, yeah. So I can't speak to necessarily Norton's attitude day to day, but I do feel like there was definitely a shift where, you know, before this he was going along to get along, and after this he had his, you know, he was fucking Costanza trying to get fired from the Yankees. He's wearing Babe Ruth's uniform and he's dragging the World Series trophy around. He was doing whatever he could to get the fuck out of there.
Yeah. But yeah, here it is. Why are you here?
Whatever, man.
What?
What do you mean, what? Whatever. It's always uncomfortable. It's always uncomfortable.
Then you don't have to be here. Why are you here? If it's so uncomfortable, why are you here? Explain that to me. Why are you here then?
Because I like performing. Okay. And this is my job.
So you could perform in other ways. You could have your own show here. You could do a million
No,
things.
I can't have my own show.
Why would you walk into an uncomfortable situation every day if it's uncomfortable?
Why don't you ask yourself that too?
I'm fine.
You're
I'm
not
happy.
fine.
I'm happy.
I didn't say I wasn't happy, but you're not fine.
I'm fine.
Okay.
You don't know the first thing about me. I'm fine.
I know. I don't know you. I've been working with you 15 years. You're right. I don't know anything about you.
You don't know. You don't know.
You're right. No, I know nothing about you. You're right. You
don't know a lot about me.
You're right.
You can just
Such an insane thing to say to someone that's known you for 15 years on a personal and professional level. Mm-hmm. You don't know the first thing about me.
That was Opie's plan coming to fruition there. Like, oh, you could leave.
It's so wild. And yeah, there's a lot. Opie's revisionist history is also very interesting, where you kind of start to piece together, if you follow it closely enough, everything Opie says is true if you look at it from the perspective of Opie has thought this before.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, where he's like, hey, you could do your own show here. He's just thought, why doesn't Jim leave and do his own show? No one has ever gone to Opie and been like, hey, we'd like to take Jimmy off your show and give him his own show on Sirius. But it's just like this creation in Opie's mind where it's like, well, just go do a show on a different channel, you know, because it's like something Opie has thought of. So now it's just fact.
I wish he listened to him and did it.
Well, we go back to Norton's self-worth, where you hear him say there, like, I couldn't do my own. They don't want just me. They want, like, the Opie radio brand or whatever. But that was not true, as we've learned, a couple of years later.
This is splitting up.
Yeah, so this was the official nail in the coffin where you hear, I don't think it's coming back after this.
So I'll do this till October, and then you can get a new partner, and I'll move on. I'm not going to quit my fucking job. This is my gig.
I didn't say you should quit, but if you're not comfortable here, then that's on you, not me. I'm comfortable here.
You're not always comfortable.
I'm comfortable
You
here.
can't even look at me half the time. I'm doing Uncle Paul. You're literally looking into the monitor like, I wish this guy would just go away.
I'm not a fan of Uncle Paul. You know that. We've talked about it, whatever. But you're not a fan of some of the stuff I talk about either. So it's just what it is.
But I don't stare into a monitor like I'm being molested when you're doing it.
No, you stare into your phone or completely ignore me. I mean, it happens all the time.
But believe it or not,
it happens all the time. If you're not into what I'm saying, you completely ignore me. Are you kidding me? Do you really want to have this conversation?
Yes, I do.
You sit there and go on your phone and completely
Hold on. You
ignore.
hear Norton's voice there. Opie does this all the time. He's like, do you really want to have this conversation? And the person is always like, yes, because so often we can't because you're in a terrible mood or something. Right now, it seems like we can have the conversation. So yes, let's do it.
1 second. I had to just bring up the video. Shut off for some reason.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Splitting up. There we go.
Always comfortable.
I'm comfortable.
You can't
here.
even look at me half the time. I'm doing Uncle Paul. You're literally looking into the monitor like, I wish this guy would just go away.
I'm not a fan of Uncle Paul. You know that. We've talked about it, whatever. But you're not a fan of some of the stuff I talk about either. So it's just what it is.
But I don't stare into a monitor like I'm being molested when you're doing it.
No, you stare into your phone or completely ignore me. I mean, it happens all the time.
But believe it or not,
it happens all the time. If you're not into what I'm saying, you completely ignore me. Are you kidding me? Do you really want to have this conversation?
Yes, I do.
You sit there and go on your phone and completely ignore me.
But
I feel like I'm talking to a wall.
I know you do, but not realizing that I can look at my phone and I can also participate in discussion. I know how to talk as well.
You tap out. You completely tap out on things. You know that.
Maybe if we're talking about something and you just automatically switch the subject because you don't want to talk about it, maybe then.
No, it's a tough spot to be in. Sometimes I just.
No, I know. I don't know how to talk. I'm talking before.
No, I'm just saying. What talking about before? What happened before?
We're talking about Sydney Party. We're just doing something. I'm talking about something, and then all of a sudden it's like, so Trump, and it's like, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you with my personal life. Like you just.
Wow, you're crazy. You're literally crazy.
You're crazy.
He just did, but he just said to what he said to him earlier. The sociopath thing. It's so funny that they just have the same conversation but reverse it.
And they do get into in this part of the argument, they get into like Opie not revealing anything about his personal life. And he's like, like we just have differences where Norton will come in and reveal everything about his life. And Opie, I forget the exact example he gave. Oh, you know what it was? Some guest was in and asked Opie what his wedding song was. And Opie was like, oh, geez, you're really going to make me talk about that? And Norton's like, we're too different. Like literally Norton will talk about fucking getting pissed on and by hookers. And Opie's like, whoa, you're asking me a pretty vague detail about my wedding? I'm not going to talk about that.
You think I'm going to dox myself?
Yeah, right. So are we still in the same argument? Is this still the Esther Koo?
Yeah. This is Opie's mood.
Well, we talked about this with Anthony where like, Opie controlled the room, and that's kind of what Jim's going to tell him here.
This has just become what it is, and it's nice, and I do enjoy it, but we don't really, talk at any level outside here.
I know, and it's you think you take responsibility, dude, but you do for part of it and on the surface, but you don't sometimes. You don't.
Like what?
Just in general, you have no idea. You have literally no idea how your moods affect other people. I'm not saying
you gotta go.
I will in October.
I'm fine here.
I know you're fine.
I'm fine here, and I enjoy what I'm doing.
We don't need to reiterate it. In October, I'm done.
By the way, and I never even really thought of this until listening to this clip right now. Opie never would have said that to Anthony, I don't think.
No.
Which is how he doesn't respect Jim as a partner.
Correct.
And he never looked at it as the Opie and Jimmy show. And I don't know that he ever wanted it to be the Opie and Jimmy show. He knew he kind of had to do it that way.
Well, I know at first Norton didn't want his name in the title.
Well, that comes up in a later debate where it's removed. But yeah, Jimmy didn't want his name in the title because he didn't want it to look like he's replacing Anthony.
Correct.
But that's just the way, like, I think Sirius had, kind of forced them to do it. But I think Opie, would have rather done the Opie show where he has a bunch of comedians in, like Vic Henley and Sherrod Small for some reason. And, done his own thing. And I think that clip was very telling because I don't think he ever would have said to Anthony, like, well, then leave. You know what I mean? Like, we heard him say, hey, we're going in two different directions. Maybe we should separate and do different shows. But he never would have said to Anthony, well, if you don't like what I'm talking about, you should leave.
No, you can't.
And that's how that's very telling of the lack of respect, I feel like.
Opie and Anthony both still, no matter how much they hate each other, have that last layer of respect that will never be broken for each other.
Yeah, it's very weird. And it's like, kind of sweet in a way.
Right.
They despise each other, but there is like when Opie makes these wild videos on YouTube that he makes now, he will never say Anthony's not funny or that it was not like that Anthony wasn't a major part of that show. So it's weird to see a guy who's that narcissistic and sociopathic still hold on to that little ounce of respect that he does have for Anthony. It's very weird.
Yeah, he knew. I think that is why, though, is that everyone's like, there's a chance that we could hear them together again.
I don't think it ever happens. But this is why I said no way Norton's there if it does. Arguments like this where he's like, well, then go. Just fucking pack your shit and leave.
They would have to. They would have to have him on.
Was there more to that clip or are we on to the next one?
There's more. Like 30 more seconds.
I know you're fine.
I'm fine here, and I enjoy what I'm doing.
We don't need to reiterate it. In October, I'm done.
I don't want to wait till October. Then that's ridiculous.
Well, I'm not quitting my fucking job.
I didn't say that.
Well, then what am I going to do? Are you going to fire me? You can't. I'm not saying you can't.
Because I fire everybody else, or I'm just asking. Why would I fire you?
Because you have the ability to. Because you're my boss.
Why? But why would I do that?
Because you just said why wait till October?
Well, you're
the one who just
silly,
said
though. If you're not happy here, then why would you stay till October?
Because it's money. It's my job. Again, I'm not a 3-year-old. It's my job.
That was something too that again very telling of Opie. Why Opie is such a frustrating person to argue with. I think. Because he presents the idea, well, then you got to go. If you don't like the shit that I'm doing, you have to leave. And Jim says, well, fine, I'll leave in October when my contract is up. And Opie says, well, that's ridiculous. I don't want to wait that long. Jim says, well, what are you going to do? Fire me? And Opie's like, oh, because I fire everyone? Like, gets pissed about it. And it's like, Opie, you presented the idea of getting rid of him. You just said. Yeah, it's ridiculous that he would wait till October. The only way to get him out is firing him. You presented the idea. And then he gets offended by it. Like, it's insane. And then he's like, why would I fire you? I don't know, because you just brought it up, man. And that's why I think he was so frustrated to deal with by a lot of these guys.
Yeah, there's two more in this argument. This one's resentment.
All right, let's hear it.
Here's what the problem is. You don't think I give a fuck about you. That's what it all comes down to. And a big part of it is because I do go on Ant's show and I am comfortable with him and I do have chemistry about him.
You're way more comfortable with him.
And you see that because he and I are more, I'll tell you what it is. And this is where everything has got, you would see me and Ant and having the way we do comedy or the way we perform, we're reaction performers. That's how we perform.
Right.
And then you're a guy who, I know people say you steer the ship and you don't do it, but we understood the necessity. We are the ones who understood the necessity of fucking and defended that when people would attack you.
Right.
And you would get uncomfortable sometimes watching he and I because you felt like you were watching two guys do something and you didn't feel like you were a part of it and you resented it and you didn't understand. Even you're the guy in the room, you didn't understand how you were a part of it.
That was I didn't resent it. I realized, oh boy, here we go. This show is ending as I know it. The chemistry was gone. You guys performed for each other, and that's how the
but
show
it wasn't
was.
just each other. It was. Opie, it was. I'm telling you, I like to get a laugh from everybody in the room.
Oh, I was laughing and stuff, but like I said, it was more me and Anthony. Our chemistry was fucking done.
But you're saying why I think
there might be a little resentment there, but it was also more like, oh wow, okay, this has run its course, and it was becoming more and more obvious. And then and then he just so happened to get fired. But that show was coming to an end no matter what.
But it wasn't up to me.
I mean, you hear Norton starting to get into it there, but Opie is the only one who says that.
Right.
And that's what's frustrating to a lot of these guys, because he's not realizing what he's saying. He's like, oh, it was obvious to everyone that, the chemistry wasn't there and everything. And it's like, no. You're feeling resentment that these two guys are close. And I think the biggest takeaway from the Opie versus Anthony episode was that Opie wanted a best friend in this. He wanted his partner to also be his kind of best friend, and I think also like sort of worship him in a way.
Yeah.
Like I think a part of Opie thought, hey, I pulled this Anthony guy out of fucking HVAC and gave him a multi-million-dollar radio career. He's probably going to worship the ground that I walk on. And for a period of time, that was probably true with Anthony.
Definitely,
that's why they were so close.
Definitely at first, for sure.
Yeah, but like any human beings, Anthony's funny and, earned his own credibility on his own talent. And so you're not going to be, you're not going to worship that guy forever, because eventually that wears out. You know what I mean? Like there's only so much credit you earn where you can also be an asshole and treat this person like shit. So I think Opie wanted like a best friend. He lost that. And I think he and Jimmy were friends for a time, but he got jealous that Jimmy and Anthony were getting close. And so there's this weird personal thing with Opie where he could never separate, business from, friendship or whatever you want to call it.
Right. He thought it was all like the same thing.
He wanted it to be. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it caused him to grow very resentful.
We got support and credit.
So this is, I think, a little. Now, this is insane, by the way, because, like I said, Jim Norton definitely on Monster Rain, which was probably his biggest special on HBO, and then for sure on a few after that. Jim Norton would stop his show at a certain point and say, by the way, Opie and Anthony are here. I just want to give credit to Opie and Anthony because without them, I wouldn't be playing theaters and I wouldn't have a special, blah, blah, blah. The reason you guys are here is because of Opie and Anthony. And he'd have them stand up and the crowd would fucking applaud them. Not only that, I would hear Norton go on many interviews after Anthony's firing, after like what do you call it there? The homeless Charlie incident. Mm-hmm. Different times Opie and Anthony would get in trouble. And then the most recent one, meaning recent when this argument happened, like 2014 or whatever it was, there was a video of Opie stomping a homeless man's cake that resurfaced. Opie and Anthony used to do something called the walkover, like when they were on XM and K-Rock at the same time. When the K-Rock show would end, they would walk over to the XM building. But during that time, they were on air still for XM. So they would have microphones in their hands and walk through the streets of New York. And there was this homeless guy named Andrew that they would interact with. And he had a cake. Can't remember the context, but for some reason he had a cake. And he's showing them the cake. And Opie goes, oh, that's really nice. Can I see that? And then he stomps on the guy's cake. Because Opie was a shock jock. He wasn't necessarily the funniest guy, but he knew like outrageous humor would get a laugh from people. Or cringe, whatever you want to call it. And there was a context to that. Opie gave him like a couple $100 afterwards. Like he gave him far more than the cake was worth, obviously. He just knew it was a funny thing and then like gave him money to help him out afterwards. So Opie really did nothing wrong. It was just a funny, dumb thing. But this video resurfaced and people were trashing Opie, trying to get him in trouble and things. And Norton was out doing press for whatever he had coming out, his new tour or his new special or something. And every interview that he did, they would ask Norton about this Opie cake stomping thing. And Norton would have to go out of his way to defend Opie. And so, like, credit and support from Norton's part, I feel, was unquestioned.
Not even for a second.
As a fan, you knew exactly where he stood as far as loyalty to Opie and Anthony.
Right.
Which makes this clip very interesting.
What I developed, by the way, and I should get at least that fucking credit. I developed this whole fucking thing back in 1994.
But I've done nothing but give you credit for that. Like I've never not credited you.
It's hard. It's hard for you to give me credit for things.
It's hard because the family.
What are you talking about?
In general, it really is
hard for me to give you credit for things. What do you mean?
It's hard, and then to beg for it, you sound like a fucking.
I don't even know what you're talking.
You sound like a fucking lunatic.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You sound like a lunatic. The day I spilled my guts about the shit Ant did and poured my soul out and actually cried, which was beyond embarrassing, which Ant thinks was fake, by the way, which is another ridiculous thing he said. Of course it wasn't, and he fucking knows that too.
I've cried on the air. Who cares?
But you could barely muster up any support for me that day or stick up for me.
Because
go listen to the tape. Because you're barely in it.
I'll tell you why.
You're barely in it.
Because that was between
you wanted to stay out of the
you and him, and that was
fair enough. Fair enough.
I can only give you my opinion because I was sitting here watching you and him air it out. I felt like I said a couple of things, but I'm like, I'm not going to fight for Anthony here because he's not here to do it, and it's not my place to do it. It's you and him on this one. What you didn't need me to support you, dude. He didn't have me there to support him.
It was disappointing considering that we do a radio show together. I wasn't looking for a fuck him type of speech, but it was like you were very quiet actually.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, the way I would be quiet if Kirk was going off on Jerry in the way that Opie was. Like, those guys were partners. I was in this case, I wasn't around for it. I'm not going to chime in and be like, here are my thoughts. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a moment like that, if you're the other guy in the room, you're not going to interrupt it.
No.
Like, if Opie's crying, it would be irresponsible of Jim to be like, hey, let me throw a few words in here. Like, the moment of him crying was captivating radio. So Norton's not supposed to trample all over it. But Opie looks at it as like, hey, you sandbagged me. You know,
of course he did.
No, I mean, I do think there's something to be said for, like, if I'm Opie on that day, there was a little bit of, like, you could tell Norton didn't fully, like, would try to take Anthony's side a little bit just to play devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. And from Opie's perspective, there is like, okay, I mean, it's me versus Anthony, and you're clearly on Team Anthony.
Well, he would also,
so I do get that.
He would do that on Ope's behalf on Anthony's show too, though.
Exactly, and that's what Opie never understood.
Right.
So are we moving on to DL Hughley now?
We sure are.
So this was very interesting. And by the way, what we just heard was in December of 2014. No. Yes, yeah. December of 2014. December of 2015, I think. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was December 2015.
It was over a year after the firing?
Yes. Yeah. Because they were signing 2-year contracts at that point. So it was December of 2015. Their contract was up October of 2016. So they have 11 months to go before this contract. So Jimmy's like, well, I'll leave in October. They have to do 11 months of shows together still. So they have guests now. I won't spoil it because DL Hughley is in. Norton didn't talk during the interview, and DL calls it out, and they'll kind of explain why that is here.
What's fun I've had doing this?
All right.
What's wrong with Jim? Are you all right?
We had issues before, so really? No big deal.
I've never seen this before. I'm like, what happened?
Quiet Norton.
I've never seen
quiet, unopinionated Norton. Is
I haven't seen him this quiet since the episode of Power.
It's one of his new.
we had, the issue was DL, if you want to get into it.
Really? What happened?
Yeah, because I like you very much. I knew he'd say that, so I'm kind of glad I did that. But when I had that pilot and you had to cancel, I understood, but you told us an hour before, after we had rented the studio, and the day before, my manager was like, "Are you sure you can come tomorrow?" And your people were like, "Yeah." And then an hour before you canceled, and I just never heard from you. So I kind of took that really personally.
I don't blame you. And let me tell you.
And I happen to like you very much. So to me, it was like, I didn't want, and I think you're a genius. I genuinely do.
Right.
But it was one of those things where, like, I feel like a dick. Like the guy has no respect for me, obviously, as brilliant as he is. No. But I mean, then I'm like, why would I have him in the show? So Opie knew that, and he knew that I wasn't feeling that. And he's like, well, DL does good radio. And then he said, I'm like, well, I have an issue with it. And he goes, why don't you just tap out for an hour? So he was basically saying that I should have left for an hour before, but I'm like, I can't do that because they pay me to be here. And I also wasn't going to be a dick to you, but I just took that very personally.
I tell you what, two things. One is, I got to tell you, I apologize for that. But, and if it happened, I obviously have to say that the onus was on me. But I knew that I wasn't able to do it, and I kept trying. I told my representative early that I couldn't do it because we had to do radio. I had to go do my radio show. Now, I don't work for a great boss like you do. I have a dick for a boss, so it was a whole thing.
I know the feeling.
I know the feeling. So basically, what that boils down to is Norton is feeling something that I think we can all relate to on some level, whether it's work or like dealing with your friends or whatever the fuck, where he asked DL to do something. If I could just fucking got blown off, never heard back, whatever. And so he was kind of like, well, fuck this. Why am I going to have the guy in, pretend everything's great, like promote his shit when like I made a request and it was just treated like I'm an asshole, basically. So I get Norton's point. Now I do think, like, I always thought DL was a pretty good guest on Opie and Anthony. And I even remember, like, he's the type of guy that came on after Anthony was fired and was like, I agree with the firing, basically. He walked into, like, the Opie and Anthony house, basically, and was like, no, I think it was a correct firing, and here's why. Like, basically, he thinks Anthony's a racist. And so, like, I always respected him I didn't agree with him at the time. but I always respected him for doing that. And so, like, I thought he was kind of a good radio guest from that perspective. And that's obviously how Opie felt. And DL calling Anthony racist probably didn't hurt from Opie's perspective. But Opie's like, hey, he's a good guest. Why don't you just leave? Now, again, two partners wouldn't say that to each other. I might say that to Craig. Say, like, hey, if you're not comfortable being on, maybe I can see if someone else can produce or something. You know what I mean? But, like, you wouldn't say it to someone who is an equal partner in your endeavor. And so Opie saying, why don't you just tap out? It makes it very clear what he thinks of Jim's role there. Right. And Jim's obviously very upset by that. Or annoyed, I should say.
Now it's moving on to Jim and Sam.
Wait, really? Oh, you know why? So they addressed it the next day, but they handled it in a way like there wasn't a lot to pull from, really. But you heard kind of the whole thing there. And then what happened was that day, the reason that really blew up on Twitter, because that's essentially the whole altercation between DL and Jim, with the funny line of, like, I know the feeling.
Right.
But there wasn't much more there. DL apologized and everything, and they were fine. But then later that day, there was a weird glitch in the audio that made it seem like audio had been pulled. They said that wasn't the case. But then on all their social media, the name of the show was changed from Opie and Jimmy to, like, the Opie radio show or something like that.
Opie Racchio.
And yes, and people were like, what the fuck is this? So what happened was Jim, after the show, texted their producers and said, hey, take my name off the show. I'm not part of this show anymore. I'm a guest. And Opie, like, in their argument, Opie's like, well, that's ridiculous. You're obviously more than a guest. And Jim's like, well, slightly. but I have to make these requests on guests we have, people we have in here, and sometimes they're not even met. You know what I mean? Not only do I have to ask you for permission, but sometimes the answer is no. Whereas again, when it was Opie and Anthony, that was never the case. If Anthony said, hey, I don't want this guy in here, he wasn't in, you know?
Right.
All right. So now let's move on to Jim and Sam, because so now we get through the, through the real dog days of this contract. Now we're in the summer of 2016. And Opie starts doing something real weird when you're in contract negotiations. Unless you're, the best wide receiver in football, it's very rare that just simply holding out before your contract is up is a wise move. In the summer of 2016, Opie just stopped doing shows.
Yep.
Like he took a vacation. And that goes back to this whole resentment for Howard Stern and his schedule and everything. So Opie stopped coming in. And Norton said, well, I would like to do some radio. So he invited Sam Robertson. Him and Sam started doing shows together. And I think that's pretty much where we pick up here.
So yeah, you want to
sure
bring up this YouTube video we got mentioned in?
Yeah, our fins hurt.
Well, so yeah, look, Opie posted a video yesterday on his YouTube channel. He's been hinting and being mysterious about what he's going to do. We said it yesterday. I don't know.
We
I'll speak
really
for
don't
myself.
know.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I don't know what Opie's doing. I don't know what we're doing.
Should we play the video? So just play it. We might as well. I mean, we have to. If we're going to talk about it, we should play it. It's hard to understand some of the audio.
Okay.
But he was in like an aquarium.
Good morning, lamb chops. This is Opie, and I want to thank everyone that reached out to me trying to figure out what's going on with me and the future of my radio show. And, well, here you go. I feel like I have to tell you something. I do not do morning radio anymore. I do not do radio with Jim Norton anymore. I found out through my agent that Jim Norton will continue with Sirius. I believe he signed a contract a couple of weeks ago, according to my agent. And it looks like he'll be doing a show with Sam Roberts. I think that's pretty obvious to everyone. I have not been fired. Sirius hasn't been very good to me in years.
There are sharks on
shot it this way. I apologize.
Huh?
It's just annoying that he recorded it that way because you can barely hear what he's saying, but that's just that's how it is. I'm
ever
sorry.
since they've officially been over, his instincts on recording have been awful.
It's wild, yeah.
Like this video at the time too could have gone like crazy on Twitter because the show was still huge.
Yeah, right. You just couldn't hear him.
No, and he's got like the Jaws music playing, and then that kid talking, and all sorts of shit.
Yes, there are.
We're trying to figure out what that's going to be.
Can't even hear him.
Satisfied with what they have offered. So let me leave you with a little lesson. Keep your head on a swivel, because you never know.
Now, he was correct and incorrect about me signing. I'm kind of glad that he made the announcement, not let me make it. But the reality is this. I've kind of hinted at it or said that I was signed at one point. But what happened was I signed the contract, and then it was Sirius wanted to change something in it. Minor. It was a minor thing. So technically, my contract was not signed until last night. Mm-hmm. And as far as you and I have done some shows together, and as far as what we're going to do, we don't have anything official. I know what I would like to do, but literally they have not promised us anything because everything is up in the air because he's not signed, so they don't know what he's doing.
Right.
But to imply, look, yeah, I don't care if somebody takes a shot, but to imply that we're like sharks who are waiting in the water, like trying to, and that's how I took this, and keep your head on a swivel, like watch your back. The reality is this: I found out a while ago that he was trying to have me have less days on the show.
So there's a lot there, but Basically what happened was Jim and Sam started doing morning shows together, and the company said, like, well, Opie essentially left. Like, we don't know where he is. He's not doing shows. Not the smartest thing to do during a contract negotiation.
No.
And Jim and Sam originally signed to do 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. They were going to be like the midday show after Opie. Norton was like, I just don't want to do radio with Opie anymore. I'll do whatever. I'll do middays, whatever gets me off this show. I'd rather do a show with Sam. But what happened was the company said, well, we would rather you than Opie. Now, Opie took that to be Jim and Sam stabbing him in the back. Now, by the way, if you guys don't know who Sam Roberts is, he was a producer for Opie and Anthony for over 10 years.
Basically birthed Jocktober by accident.
Yes. Yeah. He's the godfather of Jocktober. And then after Anthony left, he was like the executive producer of the Opie and Jim show for a minute, but then got his own show on middays on that channel. Then out of nowhere was switched from middays to nights. And I don't think Sam was too happy about that.
Yeah, it was like midnight.
It was completely out of nowhere that switch was made.
Yeah.
Also, as like a side note, Opie and Sam were very close friends. And like their wives were very close. They would go out to dinner all the time. Like they were very good friends. And Sam said, like, kind of out of nowhere, they were not friends anymore. He wasn't sure what happened. He said when Anthony got fired, and Sam wasn't crazy tight with Anthony or anything, like they're friendly. Mm-hmm. But he's like, when Anthony got fired, Opie just reevaluated how he handled his social circle. And that left Sam out. So Sam is a guy who's now been, thrown to overnights, which is a terrible spot in radio, particularly satellite radio. And now, a legendary comedian and radio personality is saying, hey, you want to do mornings with me? And Opie somehow looks at that as Sam stabbing him in the back, which is mind-boggling.
Insane how his mind works.
But also the idea that Opie was trying to get Jim off the show and is then like, well, Jim taking that job that they offered him is stabbing me in the back. Like, it's crazy for your mind to work like that, but he really truly believes that something sinister happened to get him thrown out, which is pretty nuts.
It's very funny.
It really is wild, and that's why, like, I literally, when I was cutting this up, I wanted to see if I could portray it more unbiased in Opie's favor. And it's like, I'm sorry, guys, but I can't. I just wouldn't be telling the story. I would have to lie to do Making a Murderer this thing and make it seem like Opie's innocent. What's next?
Opie goes off. Jim responds.
I'm trying to think if this is when. I'm trying to think how harshly Jim responds, because there's basically ever since then. So ever since the clip we just played, where you heard Jim and Sam responding to Opie's video, basically ever since then, Opie has been doing everything he can to get. I will even throw Sam in here to get Anthony, Jim, and Sam to talk about him.
Oh, for sure.
He will do anything. He will mention them constantly, talk about how bad their show is. All of a sudden, by the way, like, Sam is a guy that he employed and gave shows, but then he's like, Sam's not a good broadcaster. All of a sudden, Norton's not a good broadcaster. Right. I think this might be where you hear something about Rich Voss. He starts talking about how Rich Voss was never a good guest.
He wasn't funny on the show.
So Opie's basically doing everything he can to get a reaction out of these guys, and you'll hear it kind of devolve for the rest of the clips we have, more or less.
This morning.
It's funny. I'm really irritated. So let's address a couple of things. Okay. Because Opie would rather go by what people are saying on Twitter, which is a good way to do things when you've been broadcasting for all these years. Just listen to what people are saying. Clear one thing up. I never once said my stand-up was hurt by Opie himself. I said my draw was not what it used to be because the radio show I was on, which I was 50% of, people didn't listen to us. There was not as many listeners, and they weren't enjoying it. And it reminded them of what it used to be and what it no longer was. So,
and you're saying that not to blame Opie, but to say,
no, I'm 50% of it.
Right.
Of course not.
Right.
I'm not an adult who blames other people for things I fail at. Mm-hmm. So if I'm not doing well, no, I'm not. So to clear that up, of course, I'm not blaming Opie Radio. I mean, that would be psychotic.
Right.
But the show I was on, which let's be real honest, a lot of our hardcore fans didn't enjoy. They didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
So this is the day after the shark video.
Right.
Where they have basically what Jim's referring to there is he said that day, he's like, it started to affect my stand-up gigs because, for 15 years or whatever, he was essentially on Opie and Anthony every day and able to say, and this is why like the gig was so great for Artie Lang and Jackie Martling when they were on Stern. It's obviously not the same numbers, but similar deal for Norton, where it was a great gig because on air every day he could say, hey, I'm playing the Wilbur Theater in Boston next Friday and Saturday. So, built-in promotion. And he's like, suddenly that started to deteriorate because my fans weren't listening to me on the radio anymore. They didn't like the show that me and Opie were doing. And so that hurt my stand-up. What Opie reacted to is people on Twitter who, you guys are always very reliable. And someone on Twitter reached out to him and said, hey, did you hear Norton said that you ruined his stand-up career? And Opie's like, well, fuck him.
I'm going to take your word for
Jimmy's
it.
Saying, yeah, that's why Jimmy's saying, it's great when you've been in broadcasting for 30 years to just trust secondhand information and react to it.
They aren't that close, though. So
that's true. They're not that close. So I guess, yeah. Why would you listen? I suppose.
I believe this is around the same time that Cumia did the Walking on Greg Shells video, which was quite interesting.
No, Greg Shells was around the Esther. That was more the Esther Koo.
Was it Esther Koo?
Debacle.
I forgot which part. It's all. We'll have to make a timeline and post it somewhere. But this is moving to afternoons.
So this is something like, it's very weird. I heard this with my own ears. And I'm not an insider by any means. I'm just a guy who listened to the radio show. I remember Opie saying on air, he was like pleading with Anthony and Jim to start doing afternoons. And he's like, hey, Tim Sabian, who was the channel boss at the time, Tim Sabian wants us to move to afternoons. I think we should do it. Something happened in Opie's life that made afternoons preferable to him. That was true when Anthony was there, for sure. I don't know if it was still true when it was just Opie and Jimmy, but I heard it. I heard it on the air, and I remember thinking, that's weird. Why would you want to go from mornings to afternoons on radio? But I remember Anthony and Jim didn't want to, and Opie did. So Jim on this show the day prior said, it seems like Opie expected me to call him and hash this out. Why would I when he seemed to want to do afternoons anyways? He was the one who would always talk about doing afternoons. So Opie went on Twitter and said this was a lie. And Jim is responding to that.
I don't remember.
Well, he said that you were lying about the afternoons.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. Why would I make that up? Where would I get that from? He's the one who mentioned it to me. And then Tim Sabian was talking to me about it. I remember having these conversations. You were here at this time.
Yes. And I remember. And it wasn't a matter of Opie saying, we have to do the shows in the afternoon or I'm not doing it. But there was a conversation of him saying Opie wants to do afternoons. Ant and Jim won't do it.
That's crazy to me too, because Cumia, the first thing he did when he left was make an afternoon show.
Well, so the reason for that, and this changed because he ended up doing the show in the city, but I remember his big gripe with doing it in the afternoon was driving in from Long Island at rush hour.
Right.
I remember that was his big issue. Norton, I think, was literally just looking at it from the standpoint of like morning radio is better than afternoon radio. Like more people will be listening in the mornings than in the afternoons.
Right.
But yeah, I just included that part because I think it's so telling of Opie's. But like as a listener, I know that conversation happened. I was listening to it.
Right.
And Opie will be years later will be like, he's lying. and there's stuff where it's like Opie will claim things about Anthony and Jim, and it's like, Opie, we listened to the show for many years. We know this isn't true. We heard it.
He thinks he's got thousands of new listeners a day.
It's very weird, but where are we now?
Integrity.
Yeah, well, so this is Opie's. I think Jim does a pretty good job explaining it, but he's talking about Jim's integrity.
Just looking at this, someone said if I had, hey, would you be mad if Jim went with Anthony? And he said if he had the integrity, that's what he'd have done 2 years ago.
What does that mean?
I don't know. But at least I didn't lie about defending him.
Burn.
You want to talk about integrity? You want to get nasty? I would suggest you just listen to the show instead of reacting on Twitter.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good suggestion, especially because yesterday was not.
You know what showed integrity?
Mean.
When your coworker and your friend is fired and you go on his show and you don't lie to the fans and tell them, no, things were good. We're getting along. You know why people dislike me through all of that? And they were angry at me through all of that, and they still are. But nobody thought I didn't love Anthony. Nobody thought that I was indifferent to my coworker getting fired. No one thought that because I called into his first show and I went into his show as soon as I could. And I've gone on and I supported it and I promoted it. I didn't think that he had to have a fucking a decaf, a Sanka with me before. So if you're going to tweet stuff about people having integrity, I'm telling you, I was not nasty yesterday, you know, because as far as I'm concerned, he still works here. And he's still just take the deal. Unless the money's bad, unless it's horrible.
But if the money's bad, then
don't blame me for that.
That has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's not.
But I'm not, don't do this like you think that you're gonna fucking. Oh, you don't want me start. If you want to get nasty, get nasty.
Now, what's interesting about that is. So we'll hear Norton like really go at him in a minute, but like after that, I feel like it seemed like Jim took one episode to kind of like flush it out of his system and be like, "Fuck Opie."
Yeah,
and now he doesn't acknowledge it at all,
ever.
Chip Chipperson may weigh in from time to time, but Jim Norton does not ever acknowledge it. And Opie has been doing everything he can to poke the bear, and it doesn't work. And that's why I think like, if you talk about a reunion, like Anthony might do it just for fucking, even just for laughs, if nothing else. Norton has a sense of pride that I don't think would ever allow him to do a show with Opie.
Plus, I think there's just some stuff that no one knows about that happened after this. Because it seemed like, because they would talk and then all of a sudden it was silent. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It was, it's all very strange. Their relationship is very strange. But I think we move on to when Norton gets a little nastier, right?
Making fun of Opie.
Yeah. So they like I said, shots would be taken from time to time. Particularly like, you know, the Chip Chipperson character would take a couple shots at Opie. Sure, but there was nothing atrocious. It would be kind of like you know, a 2-second a reference here and there, but nothing crazy. And then I think one day Opie blew up on Twitter. By the way, Twitter ruined the Opie and Anthony show.
Easily.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it also ruined society and many other things. But its most blatant casualty is the Opie and Anthony show. If these two fucking morons could stay off of Twitter, they'd still be broadcasting together.
Yeah, it's like it's Twitter's first trophy animal is the O&A show. It's up on its wall.
They're upset. They're two 60-year-old guys who are obsessed with Twitter and can't stay off of it. So Opie yet again is reacting to things that people are telling him on Twitter.
So I got, I guess on Sunday, I noticed a couple of tweets, people asking us to address this situation where Opie was talking about our show, or he thinks that I addressed it on Twitter, the fact that he thinks that we're upset. It's just, I don't know what to say about it.
Well, what did he say?
Something about like, I've moved on, but those guys are obsessed with me. It's just like me and Ann are obsessed with him. It's fun to make fun of you. You're fun to make fun of. And people are like, why don't you just unload on him? Because he hasn't given me a reason to unload. I'm not afraid to unload on him. It's more fun to make fun of him.
Right.
To be honest with you. And as far as pushing this, he thinks I'm pushing this narrative that his podcast sucked. I never said his podcast sucked. I actually said, you fucking dumb autistic, if you'd pay attention. I actually said that the radio show you were doing in the afternoon was funny, and I thought you did good on it, and it was like you sounded happy and you sounded comfortable. The podcast, well, if you want to set up a mic in the middle of a table and have 8 guys yelling at each other and hope that people can pick it up, that's your business.
So, by the way, if you're not aware, so this is after Opie got fired from SiriusXM. Now, if you don't know this story, do you know why Opie got fired, Craig?
Because he, I forget who it was, but he filmed someone taking a shit.
Yeah, it's Roland, the talent booker. He filmed He put his phone over the bathroom stall and filmed Roland shitting as part of one of his wacky gags, I guess. I don't know why he was doing that, but he did it. Roland complained and Opie got fired. You could also argue that SiriusXM was just like, well, we're done with this guy anyways, so see you later. But Opie got fired and started a podcast where he would he would use, I think, pretty much the same microphone that I have and just put it in the middle of a table with like 5 other guys at a bar and talk. And so Anthony and Jimmy would make fun of that, and Opie responded and went off on him. Now, here's why Opie was valuable to the Opie and Anthony show, and Opie himself never realized it. Because if Sam was the guy that I thought Sam was going to be as a broadcaster, like the shitster that he was when he was younger, they would have spent like 2 weeks dissecting the Opie podcast and just trashing it and having comedians in and making fun of him and creating bits around it. And it would have been like an old school radio war type of thing, Opie versus Jim. Jim has no interest in doing that. And, I'm sure mental health wise, that's probably the right way to approach it.
Definitely. As
a listener, I always wished that they would have handled that differently. But like for the most part, Norton didn't really like he says there, he never really unloaded on Opie. He'll take some shots, but never anything too crazy. Like he's always kind of taking the high road, which Opie has begged him not to, essentially.
Yeah, if you're curious what the Opie podcast used to sound like, go to a restaurant that has pretty good commotion in it and try to listen to a conversation from the other side of the room.
By the way, a New York City bar.
Right.
It's not, this was not a desolate place. There were a few people in there.
Yeah. This next one's friendships.
I'm trying to think. Oh, let's play it.
He said Voss wasn't funny on the radio?
Oh, yeah.
That's what Voss said.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
no, I'm sorry. Start this over. By the way, in this same rant, kind of, they talk about. He says Voss was hard to do radio with, which I mean we talked about Voss in a past episode. He's a perfect radio guest because like he's stingingly quick and funny, but also like one of the all-time great punching bags.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's a rare mix where you can beat the shit out of him, call him an idiot, make fun of his lisp and his teeth, and he was a crack addict and all this kind of shit. But then he's also funny and adds to the conversation. You know what I mean? So like he's a great radio guest in that sense.
He's a perfect example of someone who says something insanely quick and it's funny, or it's terrible, which is funny.
Or it's mind-blowingly dumb, which was also great for the radio.
Right.
And I'll tell you a great example of how Voss was a great radio guest is Opie was very good at picking and choosing who good guests were, and Voss was on the Opie and Anthony show more than anybody.
A lot.
I think Voss was probably on more than Patrice even.
Oh, for sure.
Voss was on constantly. So it's amazing, and it's just so blatant when Opie will say, like, oh, Voss was hard to do radio with. It's like, well, Opie, you know how I know you're lying? Because you chose to have him in time and time again. It was your choice. You didn't have to do that.
Who was on his show when Kumia and him had that reunion?
It was Mr. Rich Voss.
On Opie's show.
Yes. Oh, Opie solo. He said, I'm going to bring just Rich Voss.
Exactly.
So it's this thing that Opie does, and he goes on to, he said, my favorite guest in Opie and Anthony history, I should say my favorite regular guest. I mean, like, obviously, Patrice holds a special place in my heart and everything. For my money, though, Colin Quinn, I always enjoyed on that show.
Oh, yeah.
He says Colin Quinn sucked on the radio.
Yeah, he's a fucking...
And the other name he throws out there that was not good on the radio is a name you might know, Dave Attell.
Yeah, terrible.
Said wasn't funny.
Yeah, he's garbage.
Yeah. So Opie's just doing this revisionist thing where now he's trashing people that he was close to for a long time. And so Norton is talking about these relationships that Opie built and, kind of questioning where they're at now.
He said Voss wasn't funny on the radio?
That's what Voss said that he said.
Okay, well,
when he was in here on Wednesday or
I hope
Tuesday
that that's not true. Because Voss has said more funny things in a month than Opie said in his entire career. You're going to say Voss isn't funny on the radio?
Or
you out of your fucking mind? Hard to do radio with? Stop. Yeah. Just fucking stop it. Oh, I know what he said. He said that Ant's a dry drunk. I'm a dry drunk and Ant's an alcoholic. Fair point.
Okay, so you won't argue that.
No, I'm not going to argue. Ant is an alcoholic, and I wasn't many times a dry drunk. I can't argue that.
It seemed like that was the big, like, how's Jimmy going to respond to being called a dry drunk?
It's a fair point. There's times I came in, I was a complete cunt. But the bottom line is this. I have to know that there's times I was cunty. I'm not fucking a victim. Mm-hmm. I'm not, I'm sorry. I'm not a delusional narcissist who thinks he's a victim. At times I was very difficult. But it's funny that I'm really still close with Anthony and we still have fun together. I'm still good friends with Troy. I'm still good friends with Sam. I'm still good friends with Travis. I still get along with Nathaniel when I see him. I'm still good friends with Club Soda Kenny. What other people? I'm still good friends with E-Rock. I still talk to E-Rock. All people.
What does he say? Like, hey.
Call me. All people who are also still friends with Anthony. So all of us are still friends. The only one that we're not friends with or who are not friends is him. Oh, Voss, I forgot to mention. I'm still good friends with Voss.
You are still friends
I'm still good friends with Bobby Kelly. I'm not saying Bobby hates him, but I don't think Bobby enjoys him. Let's be honest. All of us are still friends. All of us still get along, are still comfortable with each other. He's the one who doesn't. So you can paint it like it's everybody out to get you. If you're saying to yourself, why is it always me? Well, then you should really question that for real. Why is it always you?
And I think that perfectly goes back to him examining himself. Like, remember we played the clip earlier where he's like, no. I've looked at my shit. I've taken care of myself. I know I can be a problem sometimes. But it's like, you didn't really evaluate it. You just said, hey, I know I can be an asshole. But you're not doing anything about it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Opie was really examining himself and thinking, why do all these people hate me? How come every employee that leaves the show specifically hates me, and not just hates me, but goes out of their way, like says things like they have a sex tape with Bam Margera and my wife, hates me on a visceral level.
Right.
And obviously that's an extreme example, and that guy is shitty for just lying about something. But the greater point that Jimmy's making is true, is like, at a certain point you do have to say, like, why would everyone else make this up? There has to be a problem with me that I'm not looking at,
Yeah, he's top 5 all-time delusional person.
It's fascinating to watch, honestly, but What else do we have?
Obsessed.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because and to this day, he will say, Opie will still go on his podcast, and every time he prefaces this way. He gets mad. He'll have like a live chat going. And he gets mad at the person asking, going, Jesus, really? You're living in the past? You're going to ask about Opie and Anthony? You haven't gotten a life yet? You're still living that? Fine. I'll address it this one last time.
This week.
Yeah, and he's done that weekly for about 8 years now.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were dissecting who's really obsessed here.
Oh, and there's another tweet. Anyone else find it sad that 2 shows had to rely on me again because they're too lazy to prepare for a show? Well, what else are we going to rely on you for? The laughs? No.
It also, the show prep thing I thought was funny too.
2 shows obsess about me. Meanwhile, this fucking douche has been so obsessed with Howard. Do you know how embarrassing that shit was? Howard, shut up. I was in the hall when I met Howard. He sat at a table and kept his fucking face down at the table like a 6-year-old, scared that fucking the boss had walked in. I walked up to Howard and I'm like, hey, my name is Jim. He goes, I know who you are, man. He was really nice. And Ope sat on the fucking 2 seats away, like in the lobby, just kind of staring down, not one. So stop it. Stop talking about people being obsessed. We worked with you for a long time. None of us like you. I don't hate him, and people are like, why don't you just unload on him? Because I don't hate the guy. Like, I don't wish him bad. He started me in radio. Do you know, by the way, what a fucking prick you have to be to have changed my life and to have me not like you?
You're a pretty loyal guy.
I'm a fiercely loyal fucking dude. Yeah. I would never badmouth. If Dice fucked my mother, I'd badmouth her before I badmouth him.
Yeah.
And then, literally, if you listen to Norton, you know that's true.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like when they were getting into it with, Opie had a beef with Dice back in the day, and Jimmy would just kind of like not really interject because Dice would bring him out on the road. He was super good to him. It's the same with Opie and Anthony, where it's like he was so incredibly loyal to those guys. So you really have to chip away at that loyalty to get him to be like, oh, fuck you, man. You know? But yeah, it's interesting because obviously Opie was obsessed with Howard. So it's funny to how much Opie project, like everything he does. You know, it's not dissimilar from Stuttering John, honestly. When we talked about Stuttering John, everything Stuttering John accuses other people of, he is currently doing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like when he said like about Carl, he's like, Carl is trying to like get my gigs canceled and shit like that. Meanwhile, Carl has never done that, but Stuttering John has done it to other people. And so that's like classic Opie as well, where like everything he says about other people is true of him, only he doesn't realize it. So, you know, it's tough to watch. Oh, the other thing, you heard Sam start to throw it out there and he ended up getting it out later. Opie calls Jim and Anthony lazy because they didn't do show prep. And Sam said, it's funny that he would throw that out there. Like, yeah, I guess you're lazy if you don't do show prep, because Sam was like, I worked for the Opie and Anthony show for 10 years. And in all that time, only 2 guys did show prep for that show. And they both still work here. It's me and Travis. It's like Opie, Anthony, and Jim did not do an ounce of show prep for that fucking show, which is really, Anthony has said in the past, and this is true. He's like, I think what we were the best at, like we were better than anyone in radio history at winging it.
For sure.
Like never knowing what they were going to do in a given day and just showing up and doing it. And that was why like growing up listening to them was a detriment to me doing podcasting and radio, because early on, I was like, oh, that's what you do. You show up and just talk. I didn't realize you actually had to do work because I listened to these guys.
Yeah, and it sounds effortless.
Yeah, right.
This is our last clip.
Oh, well, are we hearing from a new voice here?
Sort of.
Well, listen, you hear Jim take the high road. He's pretty, you can tell he's irritated at Opie, but he takes the high road. But there's a much more cutting voice in comedy who doesn't care who he pisses off. And that would be one Lyle Chipperson who sounds off here.
You got to be quiet in here. I'm doing this since I'm 18.
Oh, jeez. Keep saying
a long time.
I know how to do radio.
It's familiar, but I can't quite place it.
It's my hat. So what are the odds about me and you maybe going out for supper? What, Ira? Come on, Ira. What's got you laughing today? Talk at me. I'm the destroyer. Doing this since I'm 18. I'm funny, and if you don't believe me, I'll go on Twitter and tell you. That's how you prove you're funny. Just announce it on Twitter. Despite public opinion, I'm funny. Despite those blank stares, despite the Bull Radley stares of everybody I tell a joke to, I'm funny. Fuck yeah. Proof's in the pudding.
Yeah, he just heard Irish.
Despite public opinion, I'm funny. So there's a bunch of compilations on YouTube of Chip Chipperson impersonating Opie, basically.
Right.
And so that caused a lot of people to say that Chip was Jim making fun of Opie. That's not true, but it is kind of what it became.
Oh yeah.
Like when he created the character of Chip Chipperson, it wasn't making fun of Opie, but he has implemented things that are very clearly mocking Opie, because it's very easy when you create a completely delusional, lack of self-awareness character. It's pretty easy to incorporate some of Opie's greater traits.
I would say there's some crossover now for sure. Definitely.
There's some similarities. Yeah. Whew, that was a long one.
Yeah. Almost 2 hours.
But I think we, for the most part, got to the bottom of it. But like I said, there is a 7-hour compilation of Opie versus Jim on YouTube. And then there's the last couple of clips we got were from a separate, that isn't part of the compilation, like 45-minute video. So I think it adds up to like exactly 8 hours actually in total. So there's plenty of material if you want to go investigate it more for yourself. But that's pretty much the gist of Opie versus Jim. And like I said, there's not a lot in recent years to break down, because Jim doesn't really respond to it ever. He just kind of, put it on the back burner. He's doing his own thing and doesn't really think about Opie. But if you watch any of Opie's videos, you can tell he's thinking a lot about Jim and Anthony.
A little too much.
Oh, yeah, I know. And it's sad in a way, because Opie was so far above Stuttering John in the world of radio.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, yes, Stuttering John was on the Howard Stern show, which was a bigger show, but Opie was the host of what most people would call the second best comedy radio show ever.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's really no one in that genre of whatever you want to call it, shock jock radio or whatever. There's really no one between O&A and Howard Stern. That I can think of anyways. So
I don't know who would even be close.
Yeah. So Opie, I mean, like Bob and Tom would be, or, Kevin and Bean.
No.
Would be the next level, I think. You know what I mean? And those guys aren't even close.
Yeah.
Like
so Man-Cow, I guess.
What's that?
Like Man-Cow. Just the next tier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Man-Cow, Bubba the Love Sponge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Imus.
Right.
Imus would probably be the closest, I think. But anyways, Opie was the host of, the second greatest show in that genre, and has now become Stuttering John, where he's obsessed with the old days and trying to make fights that don't exist. And, it's a very sad existence Opie has. And what's saddest is Opie on paper has the best life of the three of them. He's got a crazy Manhattan apartment. He has a beautiful wife and 2 kids. He has a house in the Hamptons. He has a pretty steady, seemingly wholesome life. And yet he's obsessed with doing these live streams where he makes up catchphrases and rants about Anthony. It's weird. So, let me know your thoughts. I'll try and do stay away from Opie and Anthony for a little while. I think the next bonus episode we do will be a mini episode. Norm on The View, that famous clip, we'll break that down. One of my favorite clips ever. cleanse the palate after that Pablo Francisco business.
We'll have to do the Patrice on Fox News too.
At some point, for sure, yeah. Maybe the next Patrice Day, November 29th or whatever that is.
Yes.
All right, folks. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Leave some feedback, and we will talk to you guys next time. Tell a friend to sign up, by the way. If you know anyone that liked the Opie versus Anthony episode, tell them this is back here on the Patreon, and we will talk to you guys next time on Why You Laughing.